In a crowded Air Force Base officers' club on a cold Nevada night, a cocky 28-year-old fighter pilot captain stood surrounded by his squadron, celebrating a training victory like he owned the sky. At the corner of the bar sat a thin, weathered old man in a flannel shirt, alone, silent, dismissed as nobody important. The captain, riding high on ego and laughter, decided to have some fun. He walked over with a smirk and asked the old man his call sign. "Grandpa? Sleeping Beauty?" The room erupted in laughter, but the old man didn't flinch. He just took a slow sip of whiskey, his scarred hands steady on the glass. Then, in a voice low as distant thunder, he said 2 words, "Night Widow." The bar didn't explode, it froze. And what happened next revealed a legend the Air Force thought was a ghost story, a hero hidden in plain sight, and a lesson in respect that would haunt that young captain forever. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The Officers Club at Nellis Air Force Base was alive with noise and celebration. Captain Derek Maverick Collins stood at the center of it all, flight suit unzipped just enough to show confidence, hands moving through the air as he retold the story of his squadron's dominant performance in that afternoon's red flag training exercise. His crew hung on every word, laughing at the right moments, nodding at his tactical genius, feeding his ego with the kind of loyalty young pilots reserve for their leaders. The energy was electric, victory, youth, and adrenaline all mixing under the dim lights and the smell of whiskey and leather. But in the corner of the bar, away from the noise, sat an old man. He was thin, maybe late 70s, with silver hair that looked like it hadn't seen a barber in months. He wore a faded flannel shirt, jeans, and work boots, clothes that seemed wildly out of place among the crisp uniforms and polished wings. Nobody paid him much attention. A few glanced his way and assumed he was a retiree from the maintenance crew, maybe a grandfather visiting someone on base, lost and waiting for a ride home. Captain Collins noticed him too, and in that moment, riding high on his own success and the laughter of his squadron, he made a decision. He pushed off from the table, swagger in every step, and walked toward the old man with a grin that promised entertainment. His crew followed with their eyes, already smiling, already in on the joke. Collins leaned against the bar, close enough to make sure everyone could hear. "Hey, old-timer, you ever fly? What was your call sign?" "Grandpa, Sleeping Beauty." The squadron erupted. Laughter rolled through the room like thunder. But the old man didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even look up. He just lifted his glass of whiskey, slow and steady, and took a sip. The laughter continued, but underneath it, something shifted. A few of the older NCOs near the back stopped talking. One of them narrowed his eyes, staring at the old man like he was trying to remember something. The bartender, a retired Air Force lifer with 30 years under his belt, glanced over and went still. Collins didn't notice. He was too busy playing to his audience. "Come on, Pops," he said, louder now. "You look like you've been around. You must have done something back in the day. Maybe swept runways, painted hangars." More laughter, but quieter this time. The old man's hand rested on the bar, fingers wrapped loosely around his glass. And that's when you could see them, the scars. Thin, pale lines running across his knuckles and the back of his hand, the kind that don't come from accidents. The kind that come from something else entirely. He still didn't look up, but his jaw tightened, just barely, and somewhere in the back of the room, the senior NCO stood up. Captain Collins wasn't done. He was on a roll now, and the laughter from his squadron was fuel. He leaned in closer, voice dripping with mock curiosity. "Seriously though, Pops, you ever see combat? Or did you just push papers and paint runways back in the day?" A few of his pilots chuckled, but it was thinner now. One of them shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the door like he was looking for an exit. Another stayed down at his drink, but none of them said anything. They were too loyal to their captain to intervene, even when they felt the air in the room beginning to change. The old man still didn't respond. He sat there, silent, his hand steady on the glass. But there was something in that silence, something heavy, something that pressed down on the room like storm clouds gathering overhead. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, something owned. Near the back of the bar, The senior NCO who'd stood up a moment ago was now staring hard at the old man. His eyes moved from the flannel shirt to the scarred hands to the silver hair, and his face went tight. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle he should have recognized immediately. The bartender had stopped wiping down glasses. He stood frozen behind the bar, his jaw slack, eyes locked on the stranger in the corner. But Captain Collins didn't notice any of it. He was too far gone, too wrapped up in the performance. He reached out and tapped the old man on the shoulder. Not hard, just enough to make a point. "Come on, old man," Collins said, grinning wide now. "Give us a call sign. Make something up. We won't tell." The laughter came again, but it was hollow this time. Even the most junior airman in the room could feel it, the sense that a line was being crossed, that something was about to break. The old man's shoulders shifted. Slowly, he turned his head. Not fast, not dramatic, just a measured, deliberate movement, like a man who'd learned a long time ago that speed didn't matter when you had nothing left to prove. His eyes met Captain Collins's for the first time, and in a voice low and steady as distant thunder, he said just 2 words. "Night Widow." The bar didn't explode. It froze. The name hung in the air like smoke, drifting through the room, settling into the ears of everyone present. For a moment, no one moved. No one knew what to do with it. Captain Collins blinked, still grinning, but the grin was starting to crack at the edges. "Night Widow," he said, trying to laugh it off. "Sounds like a bad movie." But before he could finish, the senior NCO at the back stood abruptly. His chair scraped loud against the floor, the sound cutting through the room like a gunshot. Every head turned. The bartender's face had gone pale. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Near the jukebox, an older officer, a lieutenant colonel with gray at his temples and ribbons that told stories of deployments most people would never understand, turned sharply. His drink slipped from his hand, ice rattling against the wood of the bar. Something had shifted. The air felt different now. Heavier. Charged. Captain Collins was still smiling, but it was uncertain now, awkward. He looked around the room, trying to read what was happening, trying to understand why the laughter had died and why grown men were suddenly standing like they just heard a ghost's name spoken aloud. He was missing something, something big, and everyone else in that room, everyone who mattered, had just figured it out. The senior NCO walked slowly toward the bar. His boots were heavy on the floor, each step deliberate, like he was approaching something sacred. His face was a mask of disbelief and something else, something that looked a lot like reverence. He stopped a few feet away from the old man, close enough to see the lines in his weathered face, the way his eyes held steady and calm. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "It can't be. Colonel Hartley." The old man didn't say anything. He just gave a slight nod. The kind of acknowledgement that didn't need words. The kind that carried the weight of decades. Captain Collins looked around, confused. His bravado was crumbling fast. He could see it in the faces around him, the way people were standing now, the way the room had shifted. The power dynamic had completely inverted, and he didn't understand why. The bartender stepped forward. His hands were shaking slightly as he set down the glass he'd been holding. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You kids don't know who this is, do you?" The young pilot stared at him, silent. "Night Widow wasn't just a call sign," the bartender said. "It was a legend, a ghost story we told new pilots during survival training. The name of a man who flew missions so classified that most of his record is still redacted." He looked at Colonel Hartley, then back at the pilots. Colonel James Hartley flew F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam, deep into Laos and Cambodia on night interdiction missions that weren't supposed to exist. He went into triple canopy jungle skies where surface-to-air missiles lit up the darkness like fireworks, where enemy MiGs hunted American bombers like wolves, where entire squadrons were lost without a trace. The room was silent now. Every word landed like a hammer. Night Widow became a myth because he survived mission after mission that should have killed him. 37 confirmed combat sorties behind enemy lines. 16 SAM evasions. 4 MiG encounters. A record that made him one of the most decorated and least publicly known pilots of the war. The young pilot stood frozen. Some had their mouths slightly open. Others stared at the floor, unable to meet the old man's eyes. Captain Collins felt the blood drain from his face. The weight of what he'd done, the disrespect, the mockery, the arrogance, crashed down on him all at once. The senior NCO's voice cut through the silence again, but this time it cracked slightly. He also spent 9 months as a POW after his 38th mission. They shot him down over Hanoi. He paused, swallowing hard. He never talked about what they did to him. Suddenly, the scars made sense. The ones on his hands, the slight stiffness in his posture, the way he held his glass like it was the only steady thing in a world that had once tried to break him. Everything that had seemed unremarkable moments ago, the flannel shirt, the weathered face, the silence, now carried a different weight entirely. The room felt suffocating. Every eye was on Colonel Hartley. The unspoken question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. What happens next? Captain Collins didn't try to laugh it off. He didn't make excuses. His face was red, his jaw tight, and for the first time since this whole thing started, he looked genuinely shaken. He opened his mouth to apologize, searching for words that might undo the damage. But before he could speak, the door to the officers' club swung open. Major General Patricia Donovan walked in. She was a 2-star general, the base commander, a woman known across the Air Force for her no-nonsense leadership and deep respect for military history. She'd come for the celebration, expecting to congratulate the winning squadron, shake a few hands, and move on with her evening. But the moment she stepped inside and saw Colonel Hartley sitting at the bar, she stopped mid-stride. Her eyes widened. Recognition hit her like a freight train. And then, in front of every pilot and officer in the room, she walked directly toward him. Her boots echoed in the silence. She came to attention 3 feet away, her posture rigid and formal, and rendered a crisp salute. "Colonel Hartley," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "It's an honor, sir." The old man rose slowly. He wasn't required to return a salute. He was retired, in civilian clothes, no longer bound by protocol. But he did it anyway, a gesture of mutual respect that silenced even the faintest whisper in the club. General Donovan lowered her hand and turned to face the room. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "What's going on here?" The senior NCO stepped forward. He explained the situation briefly, his words careful but clear. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't try to soften the blow. He simply told her what had happened. The general's expression darkened. Her jaw tightened, and when she looked at Captain Collins, the temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. "Captain Collins," she said, her voice cold and measured. "Do you have any idea who you just disrespected?" Collins stammered, trying to find words. "I didn't know. I made a mistake." "You made more than a mistake," General Donovan cut him off. She turned back to the room, her voice rising slightly so everyone could hear. Colonel Hartley didn't just survive Vietnam. He helped rewrite the survival, evasion, resistance, and escape protocols that every modern Air Force pilot goes through. The techniques you learned, Captain Collins, the ones that would keep you alive if you were ever shot down behind enemy lines. Colonel Hartley wrote them. Collins's face went pale. The mental resilience training that got you through your toughest days in flight school, based on his POW experience. The interrogation resistance strategies. His. The survival mindset. His. The room was dead silent. General Donovan's voice softened, but the weight of her words only grew heavier. After Colonel Hartley was released from the Hanoi Hilton, he spent 2 years recovering from torture, and then he went back to flying. Not because he had to, not because the Air Force asked him to, but because younger pilots like you, Captain, needed someone to teach them how to survive what he endured. Captain Collins was visibly shaking now. Several of his squadron mates had turned away, unable to watch. The weight of what they'd done, the mockery, the dismissal, the arrogance, was unbearable. But Colonel Hartley, still standing quietly beside the general, did something unexpected. He placed a hand on the bar. He looked directly at Captain Collins, and in that same low, steady voice, he said, "At ease, Captain. We all make mistakes. The room exhaled collectively, but the tension didn't break. It transformed into something else. Something heavier, more profound. General Donovan stepped back, giving Colonel Hartley space. The old man gestured toward a chair near the bar, his eyes on Captain Collins. "Sit down, son." Collins sat today. His squadron gathered around him, no longer laughing, no longer cocky, just silent, listening. Hartley began to talk, not as a lecture, not as a reprimand, just as a story. His voice carried the kind of quiet authority that only comes from surviving the unimaginable. "My last mission was a night interdiction run over Hanoi," he said. "December 1972. The Christmas bombings. The skies were so thick with SAMs that we called it flying through a fireworks show from the inside." He paused, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "My F4 took a direct hit. Cockpit filled with smoke. Controls went dead. I had maybe 3 seconds to decide, eject over enemy territory or ride it down. I ejected, and the moment I hit the ground, I knew what was waiting for me." The room was still. No one moved. 9 months, Hartley said quietly. Interrogations. Isolation. Hunger. Pain. He didn't say it with bitterness. He spoke with a kind of detached clarity, like he was describing something that had happened to someone else. Because in many ways, the man who survived that wasn't the same man sitting here today. There were other men in that prison, he continued. Good men. We held each other together with whispered prayers and Morse code tapped through the walls. Some of them made it home. Some didn't. His voice cracked. Just once. There was a navigator named Tommy Breslin, 23 years old. He was in the cell next to mine. He died 2 weeks before the peace accords were signed. Several of the younger pilots had tears in their eyes now. Captain Collins was staring at the floor, his hands clenched tight in his lap. Hartley looked directly at him. "You asked me my call sign like it was a joke, son. But call signs aren't jokes. They are reminders." He let that sit for a moment. "Night Widow reminded me every time I climbed into that cockpit that I was flying into the dark, and I might not come back. It reminded me to respect the mission, respect the enemy, respect the men flying beside me." He leaned forward slightly. "You wear that uniform with pride, Captain, and you should. But never forget, pride without respect is just arrogance, and arrogance gets people killed." The emotional reversal was complete. Captain Collins, who'd walked into this bar as the king of the room, was now humbled beyond words. And the man he'd mocked had just given him a lesson in dignity and leadership that no flight school could ever teach. General Donovan stepped forward again, her voice firm but not unkind. "Colonel Hartley was invited to this base today to receive a long-overdue commendation for his service. A ceremony that will take place tomorrow morning at 0900 hours on the parade grounds." She looked pointedly at Captain Collins. "I expect you and your entire squadron to be there, in dress uniform, with respect." Collins nodded, unable to speak. The general's gaze swept the room. "All of you." The next morning, the base parade ground was filled with personnel in dress blues, standing at attention under a clear sky. The air was crisp and still. No one spoke. No one moved. Colonel James Hartley stood beside General Donovan, now wearing his old uniform. The fabric was a little loose on his frame, but the rows of faded ribbons across his chest told a story that didn't need words. The silver eagles on his shoulders caught the morning sun. General Donovan read the commendation aloud. A bronze star with valor. It had been lost somewhere in the bureaucracy of post-war chaos, buried in a filing cabinet for decades, only recently rediscovered by a historian combing through old records. Captain Collins and his squadron stood in the front row. When the medal was pinned to Hartley's chest, Collins was the first to salute. His hand was steady. His eyes were clay. After the ceremony, Hartley shook hands with dozens of young airmen and women. Many of them had only heard his name in stories, whispered during late-night conversations in the barracks. He offered quiet words of encouragement to each one. A nod here, a few sentences there. Nothing grand. Just enough. He found Captain Collins in the crowd and pulled him aside. "You're a good pilot, son," Hartley said. "Don't let one mistake define you. Learn from it and be better." Collins nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He watched as the old man walked slowly toward a waiting car. His gait still carried the faint stiffness of old injuries, but his head was held high. The morals settled over the story like a benediction. Respect is not given because of rank or age or appearance. It's earned through sacrifice, humility, and the quiet strength to endure. The young pilots stood together, watching Colonel Hartley drive away. And for the first time, they understood that the legends they joked about in the ready room were real people, with real scars, who paid real prices so that they could fly free.